Joining me now, General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, always a pleasure. What are you hearing about the White House's goal in all of this? Is it for Ukraine to win?
Well, they've never said that, and they parse their words very carefully when asked a question like that. It's more about that Russia will never be able to have a successful occupation. But that's not where President Zelenskyy is, and we're not on the same page with him. I mean, he wants to stop the Russians, he wants to defeat them, and he wants them out of his country. And he wants us to do everything that we can to assist him in doing that. And I know for a fact, through sources, reliable ones that is, that for over a week now, the White House has been putting pressure on Zelenskyy to take a deal. And that indicates that they're not on the same page, because the deal constructed likely at this time would be unfavorable to him. So, yes, that is really unfortunate, and it explains a lot of things. Why the Biden administration has been reluctant at times to go all in, why they are selective about what arms and munitions they provide to Zelenskyy, because they're really more concerned about Putin's escalation than giving Zelenskyy everything he can to defeat the Russians. And that's unfortunate. And I would hope when they go to the NATO meeting that they do put on the table the mission is to defeat the Russians in Ukraine and get them out of Ukraine. That is what we should be doing, and providing the continued assistance, particularly Dagan. This could go on for weeks and months, and we need to sustain the effort. I mean, the Ukrainians have already proven us that their conventional military has the skill and has the will to deal with the Russians quite handedly. They've stopped their ground assault throughout the country, except in Mariupol. But what they need is the capability to do that. And that is what NATO and the United States have got to continue to do for them.
And also, and General, you talked about this on the news channel, but also, rather than speaking with fear and trepidation, speak harshly and clearly about what's going to happen to Putin if he uses weapons of mass destruction.
Well, yeah, one of the unfortunate things, it seems, is we keep talking about the fact that Putin may use chemical weapons, may go to a nuclear option. We keep talking about that. But what we're not talking about is what would we do as a result of that? And that's where we need to be. I mean, we should be unequivocally stating that the use of weapons of mass destruction is absolutely unacceptable. We are not going to let it stand. We will take decisive action, and it's you, the Russians, who are responsible for the expansion of the war. And clearly, this is part of Putin's information campaign. He's attempting to intimidate us. He wants to get us inside of our head. He wants to create fear, so we pull back. And I think he's actually accomplished some of that with the people in the White House and the administration.
How do you assess the intelligence community right now? Because clearly they overestimated the capability of the Russians. But what about now? Are they getting it right?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, let's be fair. We all overestimated the Russian capability, and we all underestimated the Ukrainian military capability. We did not underestimate the resolve of the people. We knew that was there. But the fact is that, yes, but the intelligence community is still providing information to the senior leaders saying that Russia has 90% of its combat power. Well, that's an absolute absurdity. I mean, yes, have they lost 10% of their people? Yes. And maybe a similar amount of equipment? But that doesn't translate to 90% of combat power, because combat power is more than the people and the things. It's also leadership. It's also morale and will and the ability to reinforce what they have, and also to sustain their organization logistically. And they're failing at every one of those things I just mentioned. So we've got to do better analysis than this. I mean, we had to convert the intelligence community that was focused on conventional warfare and conventional enemies, in other words, the Soviet Union, and it took us a number of years to turn it upside down during the 9/11 wars to focus on insurgents who are hiding in among the people. We didn't have very good systems to do that.
Right.
But we're quick, and we adapted to it. But now we seem to be having trouble with the conventional military and being able to do proper assessments of them that are comprehensive in terms of our analysis and not just counting people and things. It requires some deep analysis and making some judgments in the areas that I was telling you about.
And it does require sacrifice, and that means not funding Putin's war on Ukraine by continuing to buy oil and natural gas from Russia, which continues. General, before we go, I want to ask you about the passing of Madeline Albright. I know that you recently worked with her. If you wanted to just say something on her passing.
Well, yeah, she was the chairperson of the Secretary of Defense's Policy Board, which I'm a member of. And we met with her just a few months ago, and she reminded me of the leadership skills that she has. She was very, very much in charge. She's got an incredible personality. She's affable, upbeat, and so experienced. And what an accomplished life she has. Another one of the great American stories that exist in plenty in our country. But she spent a life serving the United States of America. And it's a wonderful thing to see, and it's an accomplished life. And we certainly extend our prayers and sympathy to her family and her very, very close friends who have a deep, profound sense of loss. And we have tremendous respect and admiration to the life that she lived.
Amen, General. Amen. General Jack Keane, I'll see you soon, sir. Thank you so much.